Hey guys, this is Charlie Shrem, and you're listening to Untold Stories. Today on the show, I had Francis Pouliot. He literally got involved over 5 or 6 years ago and founded the Bitcoin Embassy, Bull Bitcoin, spoke in front of the Senate of Canada, and one of the pioneers and formidable people involved in getting regulations passed and getting Canada's government to say Bitcoin is now money. This is the guy, and we talked about that and Backpage and the early sex workers, Silk Road history that we cannot deny and we cannot ignore, and we have to talk about the early days in history. And so I'm Charlie Shrem, and I'll talk to you guys just right in a minute. I'm here today with Francis Pouliot. Francis, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
It's my pleasure. And you pronounced my name perfectly.
Did I do it okay? I was practicing it right before I said it. No, I try to put an emphasis on it. I think because it's such an interesting space that we got ourselves into, in that I never really had to worry about how to pronounce people's names. You know, growing up in school, just where I lived, and normally the names are very similar to you. So here we are. I've interviewed like 100 people so far, and every single person I have to ask that question to, and it's really great because it makes me remember that we're in this space that it doesn't matter what like the color of your skin is, or your sexual preference, or your race, or your religion, or it doesn't really matter, No,
what matters most is your Twitter avatar.
Yes, your Twitter avatar matters the most. Yeah. So I was saying this morning, I was just kind of like texting friends about Bitcoin, and I was like, now I'm pointing it in their faces. I said, like, how's everything going? Did your Bitcoin go up? And everyone's really excited about it. But it's kind of like a bittersweet thing for you. I have to say that there are very few people that can really empathize that tweet and what you're going through now, that you have to shut down your business because of the new laws and regulations. That same messaging that you put out, you were such a pioneer, and I'm going to let you talk and take over, such a pioneer in starting the first and largest payment processor in Canada, like 5 or 6 years ago, when this was still like such a baby little technology thing. And now, because a lot of the laws that you helped put together, you've had to shut this down. And, how does that make you feel? Are you sad, happy, bittersweet, legacy?
I didn't have to shut it down. I think, I hope my tweet didn't get misinterpreted. My tweet was that it's my last day as an unregulated virtual currency dealer, but today I'm a regulated virtual currency dealer.
Oh, wow.
So we're still in business. Shit. Gosh darn it.
No, it's okay. So it seemed like it, but you know what? Now it even makes for a better conversation, because what's the difference now? Like, what do you have to do differently? Tell me. Oh, we're jumping so ahead, but you know what? Let's start there anyways.
Yeah. Well, there's actually not that much different. It's actually a good place to start because, as you said, this is kind of like a full circle thing. And that's what I was kind of reflecting on. So my tweet was something like, I used to be an unregulated virtual currency dealer, and now I'm regulated. But when I got into Bitcoin, the first thing that I was doing was kind of being a lobbyist. I wasn't an entrepreneur at the time. I was helping a bunch of entrepreneurs, including the early founder of Bills, navigate these regulations, and most importantly, establish like a narrative for Bitcoin that would ensure friendly regulations in the future. And the regulations that we got are really not bad, to be perfectly honest. They are essentially, our narrative was Bitcoin is money, and we don't want to be treated in any differently than any other money. We don't want any special privileges. We don't want Bitcoin to be forced into shops, or we don't want Bitcoin to be mandatory in any way. And we don't want any discrimination against Bitcoin. So if you're going to treat the USD and the euro and the Canadian dollar in such a way, Bitcoin should be treated the same way. So we didn't want any special bit license type of arrangement. Bit license specifically made for Bitcoin. It wasn't about recognizing Bitcoin as a currency. It was about making a new framework for Bitcoin. Whereas our mindset was more like, hey, there's already laws regulating, the local currency exchange on the corner of your street that's changing money for euros, the money service business laws. So how about we just, sneak in Bitcoin in there, and everything's good. Like, we're regulated now.
So you wanted,
that's what we did.
It's like going back in 2012 or 11 and saying to the U.S. government, like, make us money transmitters, make us the most regulated thing you possibly can now. Yes. That was a general idea. It was because we knew that Bitcoin was always going to be regulated in some way, shape, or form. There was no. I'm still a little bit. I got to get a little flack, on Twitter and Reddit yesterday, being like, "Oh, you're pro-government, you're statist, you're saying that the regulations are good." I'm like, guys, of course I don't think the regulations are good. I wish there was no regulation, but the world doesn't care what I want. There is such a thing as this huge bureaucratic state apparatus which regulates everything it sees. If this is the environment we evolve in, and the best we can do is to have the least damage to Bitcoin, is to have the least compliance burden possible. But they're going to happen anyway. There's no going around it. So the kind of regime that we got is kind of like money transmitters in the US. It doesn't change much, to be honest. CoinJoin is still perfectly fine. Like, it's okay to be mixing coins on our services in and out. It's okay to use Tor. You don't need to give an ID if you're not doing more than $1,000 per transaction. So for the vast majority of users, I mean, it's very privacy friendly. The thing that you just like start dumping hundreds of grands, millions of dollars worth of coins and expect to be anonymous, that's the one thing you can't do. But the one thing that I think is the main difference between being regulated and not regulated is now it's unambiguous that, we're in trouble if we screw up. That's unambiguous. In Canada, it's a little bit different than in the States. Which is probably for the best anyways, right?
Yeah. So, guys like you in the States, because for maybe I'll talk a little bit, but I started a little bit, like Charlie in the early days where
it's the same progression. Except you got regulated. I had to shut down.
Yes, exactly. And I think if I had been in your shoes, I would probably have had the same path going, the enforcement path that you had on your side. I think being in Canada was definitely like my saving grace, because I was a little everybody was a little bit reckless in the early days. Not in a bad way. But
just figuring out what are your fees and limits? What are your, how to do compliance, things like that. It's just all kind of like there's no clarity. There was, at least in the US, there was no clarity because there's so many different types of businesses that are involved in money. And then every state, all 50 states, they regulate them differently. So here I am, like in 2013, in the money service business on a federal level comes out and says like, yeah, Bitcoin is now considered money or whatever it was. And I got an email from my lawyer saying like, what do you want to do? And I said, well, what are my options? And they said, well, you could shut down now. And great, like hopefully it works out okay for you, or you can keep going. We can't represent you. Or you can close and then try to get the licenses and reopen back up. And so I tried for the latter, but 6 months later I was flying in to restart BitInstant. BitInstant was like a day away from relaunching, but I got arrested. So but before the better. I didn't want to do that business anymore. Anyways, it's a rough business here.
It's a horrible business. It's a shit business. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a shit business. I don't want to say that.
It's a fucking shit business, man. And like, there's all sorts of guys that come into the business, and they're like, eventually everybody that's in Bitcoin real brokerage level, it's operating apps like BitInstant, like Bitcoin. That's where you make the most money. And they're like, oh, should we launch this thing to finance our other projects? I'm like, guys, like, do you want to have a girlfriend? Do you want to have a life? Do you want to sleep well? Do you want to be healthy? Yes. Don't do this. This is the worst thing. A lot of the OGs that were operating all these kind of smaller businesses in Canada, like QuickBT and a bunch of other ones, like they're all gradually closing down because like after 5 years of this stuff, you feel like retire. Imagine being a CEO is like the hardest job you can do, but a CEO in a Bitcoin company is extremely difficult because you have to deal with all sorts of uncertainty and you have to read up. If you're CEO of a Bitcoin company, you can't like trust your tech guys. Like that's not how it works. You need to yourself be involved in these debates, learn how to use.
That's a big problem with that no one ever talks about. Can I just talk about that for a second really quickly? What you just said is so important. So if guys, all the listeners, any company that's operating in and around your Bitcoin, what you guys have to realize, and I didn't realize it, and Francis knows it, is that you, like what he just said, you can't just trust your developers, because there are private keys involved now. There's encryption involved. Now you have to trust your developers to not put in backdoors. There's all these issues. How many exit scams happen from developers, you think,
Yeah, totally. And like you can't trust your developers to not put malicious code, and you can't trust developers also to make decisions about what's the appropriate level of privacy I want for my users, what's the appropriate level of security you want for the users, what's our policy on forks, what's our policy on Lightning, all sorts of things like that. You have to do that yourself, right? And
what's our policy on forks? Like Coinbase, a trillion, multiple $billion company or whatever their valuation is, that it's going to IPO. Everyone thinks that they're coming up with, like, they're in these boardrooms figuring out these solutions. It probably went down like this. Shit, guys, someone just forked Bitcoin into this Satoshi Vision shitcoin. What the hell do we do? Like, and it was like Brian saying, this is what I think. Like, there's no precedent for this stuff. It's just, you got to like figure it out as you go.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's why you have to be super, super, super involved in the community, kind of have your finger on the pulse all the time, because when these events happen, you need to react super quickly. And then the one thing with Bitcoin is that it never forgets. Bitcoin has a very long memory. I think we've seen that. I love that.
That's a great quote.
Yeah, like the Bitcoiners, it's their life. Like a lot of Bitcoiners see Bitcoin as their revolution, their personal life mission. People come up to me sometimes and say, "Yo, I'm willing to die for Bitcoin. I'm willing to go out for the cause and stuff like that." People take it very, very seriously. So your actions in Bitcoin, there's all sorts of random anonymous people that are looking at you, and they're like, "You better not fuck up, man, because if you fuck up, we're gonna remember forever." And we're going to haunt you forever.
Yeah.
If you make mistakes in Bitcoin, you got all these little anonymous ghosts on Twitter that are going to just remind you for the rest of your life that you fucked up. So it's really hard. And then if you add the banking components to that, the chargebacks, the banks freezing your funds all over the place all the time, and the access to information requests from law enforcement and all sorts of stuff. And, it's a shit job. I would much rather... I started to work on open source projects more and more, and trying to switch my time over to these things, because these are projects where I don't have to worry about, like, my
compliance.
Entire business. The clients too.
I said compliance. I remember telling myself, I was sitting in jail, and I said to myself, man, I'm never becoming a barber just because you need a license to cut hair. Anything that requires a license, I'm not doing anymore.
Oh, totally. It's insane the amount of time that I've spent in my life dealing with government permissions, and it's unreal in a way. I was libertarian like before I got into Bitcoin, before I launched my own business. Can you imagine the degree on a daily basis? Just like whatever I want, it's always something government related.
Here's a pen cup from a bank I got kicked out of, but at least I got to keep the cup.
Yeah, I mean, I got kicked out of so many banks. It's when I was doing that's when I started in Bitcoin. I was a libertarian, so I was like, bank's a private business, so I don't have anything against a private business. Yeah. But I didn't understand money at all. First, I didn't understand money and how it worked, and the whole Austrian economic monetary Bitcoin. I discovered that part of economics after Bitcoin. I was more of a traditional free market anti-regulation person. I wasn't really into money that much. And the just the general hubris of the cartel of the banks. The fact that the banks are, at least in Canada, I mean, it's not the same in the US, but at least in Canada, the banks have this special law that allows them to operate, and no one else can operate. And if you're kicked out of a bank in Canada, they treat you like dog shit.
Is there like a list, like a service that tells the banks that you've been kicked out of other banks? Yes,
absolutely.
Oh, that's the worst.
I got kicked out of 3 banks on the same day. I'm sorry, this isn't coincidence. Like, that was just so obvious to me.
Yeah.
Fair enough. I was doing local Bitcoins and stuff, which was against their terms. But so, I mean, I'm not gonna like.
You could almost like feel the account getting ready to close. It's when you get the random compliance check They just want to know a few
yeah.
more questions about your transactions. And then you get the certified letter. Oh, that certified letter, when it comes from the bank, you know what that is.
Yeah, you're screwed. you're dead man walking.
What was it? Then they give you 30 days. So then you're like, all right, at least like 30 days. Sometimes I fought for 6. One time they gave me 90 days. I'm like, damn, this is just like I get to keep my bank account for another 90 days. It's not a bad thing. It's like, you know.
Yeah. And this is good. And then the worst part of it is in one of my cases, they're like, I'll give you a check. They didn't let me withdraw the money in any way, shape, or form, just a check. And I was like, what the fuck am I going to do with the check? Where am I going to go cash this in? I mean, this is ridiculous. And they even closed my credit card just because I was associated to Bitcoin. So that really made me anti-bank super. And then, I started to kind of accelerate my brokerage activities in 2015 in the summer. That's a good also story. Tell me the story, and what was the first business model too? But I want to hear the story. Yeah. Well, the first business model was the Bitcoin Embassy. So the Bitcoin Embassy, have you been to the Bitcoin Embassy?
No, I haven't been to Canada in 10 years. I'm kicked out now. Yeah. But what story were you going to tell though? Because now I'm going to get emails from the listeners saying you interrupted his story.
No. That's the story. So the Bitcoin Embassy was this physical office that it's hard to describe what it was. The origin of the Bitcoin Embassy was there was these 3 guys.
I saw videos and pictures of it, but I never got a chance to go.
Some of them, there was Gil Metzer and Jean-Marc, and they were kind of known in those days, and mining and stuff like that. And they had this building. Jean-Marc had this building that was 3 stories with a basement, and he was a real estate dude, and it was empty. And they wanted to launch this kind of nonprofit to do lobbying. And then Jean-Marc was like, "Hey, how about we use the building I have, make it a physical kind of hub for activists in the Bitcoin space where they can feel safe and do their offices, so co-working space and events." And at the time, it was very popular to do these startup kind of little hubs with VC a little bit involved and stuff like that. So let's just do this kind of ambiguous organization, which is the Bitcoin Embassy, which is a physical space, and it has you can rent an office there, and we can do meetups and all sorts of fun things like that, and selling T-shirts and Bitcoin trinkets and Bitcoin magazine.
Yeah, of course, it's the dream,
The public relations, the media stuff, the event organization stuff, like the meetup. I got hired specifically to animate and organize the meetup, and then I was heading a little bit of like what BitMEX research is doing. So writing some reports and talking to the media and sending letters to the government senators whenever there was a hearing and that kind of stuff. And over time, we had this beautiful physical office with a glass window on Saint Laurent Street on the corner of Sherbrooke. So for people who know Montreal, it's basically right in the middle of the party area, like very, very visible and an extremely visible storefront. I mean, iconic level storefront with big Bitcoin signs. So obviously, people would come in and they would be like, "I just want to buy Bitcoin. Can I buy Bitcoin?"
These were very formidable years. These were the years where like the brain was being formed. So like people's perception of Bitcoin mattered. And so I guarantee you, having a physical Bitcoin embassy, a lot of those lawmakers and senators that you spoke in front of, a lot of those people walked by nonchalantly the Bitcoin embassy when they're getting ice cream with their daughter or whatever, and it's a subconscious thing. And that's what I was telling. That's what Nick Spanos, when he started the Bitcoin Center in New York, he's like, I'm not going to make any money. I'm not going to do anything from this thing. This is a losing business. But the fact that it's here and it says Bitcoin on Wall Street, all my other business ventures will now succeed because of it. I said, it's fucking brilliant.
Yeah, it was obviously a huge loss of money for anybody involved in those physical centers at the beginning, especially
his rent was like $40K a month or something like that, and this was when Bitcoin was only a few $100s.
Yeah, absolutely. The Bitcoin embassies. So we were lucky enough to have the owner kind of donate the rent towards the for the first 3 years. But again, it was like definitely something like $25,000 a month that was going into the rent of the Bitcoin embassy. It was a huge space. And you're 100% right that the fact that they had me and I wasn't the only one, obviously, at the beginning. There was a few other guys, but I was kind of like the nice a nice presentable face. I was wearing a suit and tie kind of every day at the Bitcoin Embassy. And then having that big window was hugely influential, just to say, hey, this isn't some hacker in a basement in the US like we see on the news. You got Francis, which has a variable to the Quebecer authorities and the Canadian authorities. They look at my background in economics and they take me very seriously. And you show them photos of the building, and you show them a bunch of entrepreneurs that are sitting around a coffee, and you show them
exactly. They see that it's like a real thing.
They create jobs. This is going to create revenue. This is, stuff that there's votes behind this. There's actual there's a constituency behind this. And at the beginning, we were just doing. If you walked in the Bitcoin Embassy, you wouldn't be able to buy Bitcoin or anything. It was just like, hey, can you help me with a wallet? I lost my seed. I want to launch a business in Bitcoin. Can you guys help me? It was just like you can call it like a big filter. And the business idea behind this was everybody's going to come talk to us. The people who want to buy, the people who want to sell, the people who want to mine, the people who want to invest. Everybody's going to come talk to us, and then we're going to be able to, match people together and get into all these business opportunities. So it wasn't like a purely nonprofit venture. Of course, you had a bunch of crazy libertarian capitalists that were running these things. So it was about a good
balance, though.
Yeah, totally. It was a quid pro quo, which is, hey, we're going to give you free shit, and we're going to make Bitcoin great. And then the upside that we have is like we have the insight onto who's doing what and what deals to invest in. And there was a lot of early Bitcoiners there, and even when Bitcoin was $200, you got guys that had Bitcoin at $1. So they were already super wealthy dudes that wanted to invest in hash rate and stuff like that. So it was kind of a big opportunity magnet. And then I was just hired. I was paid. I wasn't an OG. I got into Bitcoin in more or less the early part of 2013 because the founders of the Bitcoin Embassy were just personal friends of mine. They were libertarians, and I was doing a lot of libertarian advocacy. I was doing a lot of advocacy for students' rights against the student unions. And I was kind of getting famous for that. So I was like, oh my God, we need this guy as, our advocate. So they specifically kind of recruited me to be the Bitcoin guy. And I knew in the beginning, it was purely on trust because these guys were, Porkfest era libertarians, Ron Paul era libertarians. And they were like, Francis, it doesn't matter if you don't understand Bitcoin, just trust me. Bitcoin is the thing for you.
And you'll figure it out.
Yeah, exactly.
You clearly have a lot of passion, and anyone who follows you on Twitter knows that you're very passionate about your beliefs. You come after a lot of projects and coins and tokens and everything.
Yeah.
The ones that have been started in Canada, like Ethereum, does it still make you proud, even though you consider it a shitcoin?
No, I'm not particularly proud of that. I mean, not specifically.
I'd be proud as as a Canadian, it's like so much innovation has come out of Canada, even though I don't agree or believe in that innovation. It's like, why not? I don't know.
Well, I mean, I guess that's kind of like the second stage of my Bitcoin career was the philosophical, I guess the internal debates that I had around the altcoins, which I now call the shitcoins. Yeah. It's kind of a second, it's different. It's different because I see those things as not being innovation so much anymore as being rent-seeking machines, and that's kind of a different path. But definitely there was a lot of I mean, at the time I was definitely proud for sure. At the time, you had a bunch of other stuff going on at the Bitcoin Embassy. You got Litecoin development that was going on there. Litecoin community was huge in Montreal. There was core Litecoin developers there. You got the Ethereum was developed in Toronto at the Bitcoin Embassy of Toronto, which was Bitcoin Decentral at the time.
Yeah.
But also the Bitcoin Embassy itself. I mean, Vitalik came by early 2014, maybe late 2013, with Charles and a bunch of other people to work on Ethereum stuff at the Bitcoin Embassy. So no, there was definitely a lot of innovation coming out of there. But my focus was specifically the payment censorship. That was my number one focus going into Bitcoin was 100% just censorship. It wasn't even sound money. It was whatever can allow people to get paid without that payment being stopped by government. Because I saw
looking at sound money is a very narrow view, because you got to look
Yeah.
at Bitcoin as could be anything could be on the blockchain and like data.
Yeah.
So censorship. Whenever I get on stage and I talk about someone's like, "What's Bitcoin?" I say, "Wait, let me explain to you. Censorship resistant and why that's so important." That's like where I start too.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And the sound money aspect of Bitcoin came just a little bit later, actually, because when after I got into Bitcoin, I started to need to explain Bitcoin. So kind of like my career was, hey Francis, stop working in economics and public policy and advocacy, and like come work for us and be our economics dude and public advocate dude. Like, okay. And then the first thing I had to do was 2 months after I got hired, or 1 month after I got hired, I had to do a TED talk on Bitcoin in early 2014. And I'm like, fuck, I know nothing about Bitcoin. Like,
really?
Yeah. So I was like, I mean, I knew enough about Bitcoin in the sense that I owned Bitcoin. I had bought Bitcoin on Mt. Gox, and like I did the whole, and I just got hired to work as a Bitcoin public policy guy. I know what a private key is. I know what a public key is. I kind of understand how mining, but I didn't obviously understand how mining worked.
Yeah, but everyone who gives TED Talks, they're always like ambiguous, like up in the clouds, like, here, I figured out how to cure cancer. If we could only do this. I'm like, great. At the end of the talk. So like, you don't really have to I've given a TEDx talk. You don't have to get specific. No, I'm just teasing. I love those.
No, but you're right. There's no questions from the public. So I was like, okay, I can pull it off. And then I started to watch the Mike Maloney, Mike Maloney's Hidden Secrets of Money YouTube videos. Yeah. And I was like, wow, I have a master's degree in like economics and policy, and I had never heard about the process of money creation in a way that was described like him. And I mean, it's silly because you think about these YouTube videos as being for the plebs that are not educated economists, but trust me, like in economics at university, you don't learn at all the process of money creation. And I was really, really mind blown by the process of money creation. But first and foremost, it was censorship resistance was like the key for me. So that's why even in today's like, is Bitcoin cash or is Bitcoin gold? And I'm just like, it's definitely just both, guys. Like it's absolutely both. There's no trade-off between one or the other as far as I'm concerned. Like we can have the censorship. If censorship resistance floats your boat, that's great. Bitcoin is for you. If the number go up, Bitcoin price go up, everything becomes cheap over time because there's no inflation in Bitcoin. If that's what the sound money aspect, if that's what you want out of Bitcoin, that's perfect. You can have that part of Bitcoin. But then so if you're running this kind of like, to go back to like the physical store, I mean, what people really wanted was to buy Bitcoin. Like that's what people want. I mean, that's also part of the reflection about like doing advocacy and education. I was like, this Bitcoin really sells itself in a way. It's fun to, we were doing all sorts of like pro Bitcoin stuff. A lot of time trying to get people to learn about Bitcoin and to get to know and love Bitcoin in the beginning. And we're doing like the Bitcoin airdrop and all sorts of fun things. But ultimately, there was already a huge demand for Bitcoin. And the problem of the industry was not people don't want Bitcoin. The problem was people want Bitcoin, but they can't use it. They can't buy it. It's really hard. I mean, BitInstant was genius at the time, like how to buy Bitcoin. I mean, that was the key. That's what Bitcoin needed. Bitcoin needed BitInstant, and then the Bitcoin ATMs after that. That was just the big wave. Like the Bitcoin needed Bitcoin ATMs for people to drop the bill in it.
I was doing you just reminded me of a funny story. I was doing like an NPR talk about death, sex, and money, and she said to me, Charlie, like I read about your whole life. Why should anyone have trusted you back then? And I said, to be honest, if I look at BitInstant's website now, I would not use that site. Like it just looked like a scam. But it was a one-page site that was thrown together HTML by me, and I'm not an engineer in any sense of the word. Like I'm literally the definition of a script kiddie. So here you have this company is doing we're doing hundreds of thousands of dollars a day on this site, on this one-page site that was just. The site was built like this. It was a piece of paper, and we said, what labels do we need to have? Okay, how much Bitcoin you want, how many dollars you have, Where is the money coming from? Where is it going? And we should probably have the pictures of ourselves on the bottom. And literally, I sat there drawing, so our first site was just, but we built the companies, we built the products, you built bills, you built these because you needed them for Bitcoin to succeed. These were products that you and I needed for us. We weren't building them for other people, we're building them for ourselves.
Yeah, and there was also like overwhelming demand for these.
Can you kind of like take me in the moment of like right before you got, how does one, speak in front of the Canadian Senate? How does that happen? Do you get an email? Do you just show up? How does that work?
That's a great story. That was already the beginning of, I had just been in Bitcoin for about 6 months when this whole thing happened. So
you were really thrown into this thing like crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. And from that point on, there was it was my whole entire life.
Yeah.
But I knew how to get into the Senate. I mean, from having been in a research institute in economics, whose main kind of like modus operandi or whose main job was to get in front of Parliament to advocate for free market reforms and stuff like that. I knew how to do that. So I saw that they launched the study, and I just kept emailing them. And I kept emailing them and saying, hey, like, I represent this organization. I insisted. I was just really insistent on, you need to talk to us. And this is the kind of people that you want to talk to. And I send them a list of people that they should invite. And then you have to think of people, they care really about one thing is they want to make sure their job is to get a representative sample of the industry. And that's what they're paid for. And if it happens that they invite one faction or the other, they're in trouble. Like, these are interns that are making schedules. These are like low-level people that are booking. The senator himself is not deciding who gets to speak, right? It's the low-level people, and they don't want to be in trouble. And they got me, who was like, hey, I work in economics. I work as a public policy person. Here's a list of different factions you have in Bitcoin. So this is like Bitcoin ATMs. This is Bitcoin miners. And we are like in the middle. We're the nonprofit guys. And you should invite all of us to the hearings. And like, great, that's a great list. And it just kind of ended up going down that list and inviting. It's funny, like when I went to the Senate, you had me, Guillaume, Jillian, Michael Perkling, and Stu Hogner, which were all five of us were basically the same exact viewpoint, and we had.
I'm very surprised by that.
Yeah, and like we had organized ourselves before. We were like, okay, let's go in, five of us at the same time. You're going to cover this aspect. I'm going to cover this aspect. We were very strategic about like having a super fucking on point message, and it was very stressful because we definitely felt like this event was the first recorded kind of session. It was the first. A lot of power. It has almost no power. It really just kind of makes recommendations, but it was very crucial because that study ended up being what's cited in the laws later. We knew that this was going to be the one kind of document that people were going to use for like, what is the Bitcoin community's position on topic X or topic Y? And it was super stressful. It was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. I mean, coming out of there, we were super high on adrenaline. It was really wonderful. It definitely made us feel like we were doing a difference. It was super motivating for all of us, and it ended up doing a real lot of good because the senators, some of the senators bought Bitcoin, by the way, afterwards, and it was just fantastic.
What was the?
And it opened the doors also to be the other government agencies. From that point on, there was no doubt in the government's mind that me and Guillaume were the people that you need to talk to. And it was so, like, I snuck in some parts of the Crypto Anarchist Manifesto in my speech. Like, it was kind of like a private, we were super Trojan horsing.
Oh yeah, you threw some like terms in there and some lines. That's awesome. I didn't know that. That's really cool.
Yeah, no, that's like there's a little Easter egg in there about when the Crypto Anarchist Manifesto, they say about the future of negotiating electronic smart contracts that you can't renegade on. And we were like, oh my God, like we did it. Like, we were radicals. We were super radical libertarian guys. And we're just like, oh my God, we just put ourselves as the guys that they're going to come to. We wanted to avoid what people know today as kind of like the blockchain consulting kind of type. The Deloitte, PwC type.
Yeah. The permission chains and stuff.
Yeah, we wanted those people to not be the it was important that we would be the face of Bitcoin and not them. And we would definitely, I definitely recognize that, we were giving ourselves titles that we can't have. You can't call yourself the ambassador of Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't have ambassadors. Bitcoin is decentralized, but we were still doing it, right? We were still saying like, hey, I am the representative of the Bitcoin community. And we had no right to do that. But the thing is, no one complained ever, right? So because we were doing a good job, like no one came to me and says, hey, you can't speak on my behalf. Like that never happened. It happened with the Bitcoin Foundation, for example, like all the shit that the Bitcoin Foundation got. The Bitcoin Embassy never got that flack because we were consistently like libertarian and cypherpunk. And so, if I'm the one who's saying, hey, I represent the Bitcoin community, no one around me is complaining, and I'm the guy who's on TV, boom, you're in. And then once you're in, you can start to sneak in the message, right? The core value proposition message of Bitcoin at this institutional level, and it gets adopted. The regulations we have at the Canada level are not that bad. I mean, they're good. They're well. The people at the Ministry of Finance and at FinTrack, these are guys and women that have been studying Bitcoin since 2014. And when they study Bitcoin and when the regulators, they study these things, it's my YouTube videos they're watching. They're watching my YouTube videos. They're coming to my meetups. They're reading my reports. And, the ideology, it definitely seeps in. I mean, they become Bitcoiners. They buy Bitcoin and then Bitcoin goes up. And then they're like, oh shit, Bitcoin went up. I'm a Bitcoiner and I'm also a regulator. I got to buy more.
People have been buying, like they just keep buying, but I wanted to, a lot of, there was a protester recently here who had like a sign that said Bitcoin fixes this, what's going on in the US with George Floyd, and you have protesting all. I've never seen protesting this bad. I grew up in New York and I've never seen demonstrations like they looted the dispensary. Who loots a dispensary down the road? I know, right? They loot like Champs sneaker stores and all, whatever. It doesn't matter. Well, it does matter. So it very much matters. And so you're in Canada looking down at us, and not like looking down on, like you're just physically in the north. And you're looking at us now, and a lot of the people, what's going on right now in the U.S. is coming down to like inequality, race inequality, wealth inequality, gender inequality. But there's this huge amount of inequality. And I even remember saying to myself before COVID happened, I said, they're going to put a stimulus package through. And what that's going to do is it's going to further like disenfranchise the middle class. Is just going to go away because, when you print money, it benefits the really, really rich and the really, really poor. It doesn't benefit anyone in between. So you have now the craziness going on. And what a lot of people in the US are saying is we need to follow like the Canada model, equality. If we have the Canada model, if we have social safety nets, and take 50% of our taxes. And so you're up in Canada and you don't have as many of the issues with social inequality that we have here. Do you see your model is like, you're an economist. Is that the solution, or what is the solution of the current events, but like more government? Is that something we should be wanting or fearing in the time of the day that we're in right now?
Definitely fearing, definitely not wanting. So the thing with the US that's interesting is like everything's more extreme in the US. Everything's more intense than
the most
other
understatement
places.
of the year.
Yeah. And the thing is, you get the worst protests in the world. Well, not in the world, but in let's call it the Western world, right? The very violent. Well, it's, there's crazy shit going on in France also, but I mean, it's more rough in the US, perhaps because there's access to firearms, which I think is a good thing generally. But I mean, there's just a culture of rebellion in the US. People are just tougher people. Let's just be honest. Like, people don't take shit as easily as in Europe or in Canada, and you've got this constitution, you've got this history of rebellion. So it's still more intense in the US, but the good sides are intense as well and extreme as well. Like you have no other country that produces this insane technological innovation, this insane industry. The US has been consistently producing the best shit in the world, leading in every sector almost for 50, 100 years. And even if they're leading in the bad sectors, like, military interventions and droning villages, there's not a lot of countries that are as good as destruction as the US, but at the same time, there's almost no place on earth which is as good as creation and creativity and innovation as the US. So it's definitely like two-edged sword. But the thing is, in Canada, there is still this social inequality, very, very, very much. It's just that the social class in Canada that has a bunch of the money is the class that is able to suck subsidies out of the government. And this is not like a metaphor. If you go where I live in Montreal, there's the higher up you are to the mountain, like close to the mountain, the richer you are. And you go up in these rich neighborhoods and it's all TV personalities. It's all high-level bureaucrats. High-level bureaucrats are paid, six-figure salaries a year. It's all the union people. And you've got this kind of social class of like 200,000, 250,000 people. We call it the Quebec Inc. The redistribution of wealth doesn't go to the person at the bottom. It goes to the industry, the strategic sectors of the industry. And what that is that's just businesses, right? So it's taking the wealth from everyone and giving it strategically to businesses. And in terms of just general like welfare state, like Canada's fucked hard. Like our schools suck. Our hospitals are really bad. Like when people think that Canada has good hospitals, no, do not think that at all. Like people are literally dying in their shit and piss. It's like third world level hospitals. It's really, really bad. It's good. Like I would say, if you get cancer, Canada is probably good because you get priority over everyone when you have cancer. Cancer is like the C word over here. Like now it's corona, but it used to be cancer. Like if you got cancer, you're good. Everyone else, you got Parkinson's disease, bye-bye. Like it's this cancer gets priority and everything. But other than that, it's really bad. And the thing, what it creates is this massive bubble of fragility. Like the US is anti-fragile. Shit happens, it's always volatile. It's always kind of breaking apart. But as a general system, the US is not going to collapse. Some states might collapse, but as a general nation, the US is definitely in a much better position than most other countries. Canada is super fragile. We don't have any gold in our bank reserves. Our banks have no assets. The personal level of debt in Canada is the highest in the world. Like the Canadians have the most amount of personal debt and also government debt. We are living on a bubble of credit. It's really, really bad. The whole country's falling apart. There's no national unity. And they've been trying to create. That's why the governments are so into multiculturalism and the politically correct social justice movement. That's been the Canadian way for like the last 20 years, is because there is nothing else. Like if you ask a Canadian, what's Canadian identity? The only thing that people can really say is we're not the US. That's the one thing that people say is we got free healthcare and we're not the US. There's nothing for us to be united on. In Quebec, we have, our cultural heritage and Francophone legacy, which is why Quebec works relatively well compared to Canada. But no, there is still a lot of poverty in Montreal and in Canada. Like when the first kind of constituency for Bitcoin that I saw was young Black men. That was the first constituency to Bitcoin, and it was overwhelmingly young Black and Arabic North African men. And this was the same thing that happened in other physical spaces in the world, including a few that I visited personally. This is always a discussion that we would have in kind of the private to be like, hey, who's coming to middle of late 2014? And it was because the kids in the ghetto were using Bitcoin for fake credit cards to buy stuff, right? So that was like a really prominent first use case of Bitcoin. And I mean, we can talk about it now because it's a while back and this is not what Bitcoin is about anymore. But you had all these really, really ghetto kids that couldn't afford anything, and they would buy fake credit cards and stolen credit cards on the dark web, and they would straight up just buy clothing with them. And they would line up at the Bitcoin ATMs. And I was like, wow. Like,
there are people who won't retweet this show because they don't think we should just sweep under the rug our history. Like the whole libertarian roots, anarchist roots, Silk Road, like it's just all bad. And, It
happened. It happened. Like, what can you say? What can you do?
It just happened. Yeah. I'm not glorifying it, but we need to document and chronicle it.
Absolutely. And the point of what I'm saying is, Bitcoin is not reserved for the elites. The opportunity of Bitcoin, I mean, the opportunity behind Bitcoin is not to buy fake credit cards, let's be honest, but it's not inaccessible at all. Like anybody could use Bitcoin if they wanted to. And then and the other constituency that's not talked about at all is sex workers. Like sex workers were a huge, huge component in Bitcoin's early economy, because sex workers were not able to purchase online advertisements.
Girls Gone Bitcoin, all the Bitcoin sex cam girl sites, all. Yeah. I forget the names, but they were all. You don't hear about them anywhere. Like I don't know what happened, but that was such an early part.
Backpage.
Like that was
Backpage was
Backpage. I remember. But what's funny was that was the early community too. Like the early community. It was not taboo in the Bitcoin forums or on the early R Bitcoin to talk about, like, to cross post Girls Gone Bitcoin. Can't do that anymore. You can't. It's just different worlds.
When people talk about OGs, like they don't have the same OGs in mind as I do, because and we still laugh about this. When we saw sex workers and teenage ghetto boy skaters that are buying weed or something, and they were like. We knew that Bitcoin was going to be $1 million one day. I mean, we didn't really believe it. Now I believe it for sure. But back in the days, like, it was, maybe Bitcoin is going to be 10 grand. We saw Trace Mayer was saying,
now we know grand. It.
Now we know it. But we kind of imagined that one Bitcoin would be worth, like many houses. You could buy multiple houses with a Bitcoin in the future. The math is quite simple. And we were just like, oh, look at all these people. Like if they keep the loose change of the Bitcoin they're buying, because they're buying like 4 Bitcoins now, they're buying 3 Bitcoins, Bitcoin's like $100 or something. They're buying $500. It's like, if they keep the loose change, they're going to be rich. It's the Bitcoin bearing class. And then the one thing that really propelled me in Bitcoin was Backpage, actually, was Backpage censoring the credit card payments and the paysafe card payments. So for those who don't know, and if you're with your girlfriend right now, just obviously say you don't know what Backpage is. Backpage was was a classifieds site, and it's kind of like Craigslist. And it's to
Craigslist. Yeah, it's to Craigslist what like Silk Road was to eBay or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Which is they do not censor sex ads. And the founders of Backpage are actually they're kind of amazing pair of people. Very interesting story, the story of Backpage, but they were newspaper guys. They were that made money with classifieds back when classifieds were a thing, like paper classifieds. But hence the name Backpage of the website, because it's the back page of the paper where the classifieds were.
Oh, interesting.
And you would have all sorts of like sex stuff, right? So erotic massages, and just escorts. Really, let's be honest, it was just escorts were advertising there. And then they got sued by the Chicago sheriff or something. And then they won the lawsuit against the Chicago sheriff. But Visa, MasterCard, and PaySafe, and all these payments companies decide to shut them out.
Once you're on their radar, you're going down. Yeah. And they knew they were going down too.
Yeah. So before they got censored by the other payments companies, and I was writing on my blog, and I kept having like a bunch of sex workers coming in once every couple of weeks, and they would be like, "How do I use Bitcoin?" And then I would kind of be like, "Okay, so here's this like 23-year-old blonde girl that." I'm not going to judge, but she's probably a hooker because she looks like a hooker. There's, you can sometimes tell, and then I'm just like, what are you doing with Bitcoin? I'm just curious, man. And then they started to tell me, oh, there's this webpage where I advertise my work, my job. And I'm like, okay, interesting. So I wrote this blog post, like how to buy Bitcoin and use them for Backpage. And I was good at SEO. So I knew how to write a good SEO, like blog post. So I read this blog post, and then Backpage, from one day to the next, they just shut down every payment method except Bitcoin. And I had my phone number on the blog post because the Bitcoin Embassy had its own phone number for contacting in case you wanted advice on, what wallet you want to do, stuff like a free, toll-free phone number. And then Backpage put like my article on their website, and they're like, hey, if you need help with Bitcoin, just call these guys. And I was like, fuck, because Backpage had like, I don't know how many, but multiple hundreds of thousands of users that would that would pay for ads, and almost all of them were sex workers. And then they're all just suddenly calling me, being like, what the fuck is going on? I need to work. I need to get my fucking ads on that site because I got my kids to feed. And this saying, I need to buy Bitcoin. Are you Mr. Bitcoin? Can I buy some? And they would be calling me from the US. You know, it was overwhelmingly from the States. There was also Canada, but it was almost, so I got these sex workers from, you know, Florida, Georgia, Arkansas. They're just all calling the Bitcoin embassy being like, we need help, sir. We need help to buy Bitcoin. What do I do? What do I do? So, I mean, that's when I was like, okay, there's this overwhelming demand for Bitcoin. Like, what am I going to do about this? So that's when I launched the early version of Bull Bitcoin. Actually, before Bull Bitcoin was Bull Bitcoin, it was called Bitcoin Outlet, and we had this online brokerage for Canadians, because I was selling Bitcoin. Like, the part that's missing there in the story is also I was selling Bitcoin for cash at the Bitcoin embassy. So at some point we incorporated as a business, and we started to sell Bitcoins for cash at the physical counter, and we were selling a lot of Bitcoins. Like, it was definitely
not a small
the biggest
amount.
No, it was not a small amount. It was a lot of clients. I mean, you know, multiple dozens of clients a day coming in to buy Bitcoin. Think of the world's largest Bitcoin ATM. That's kind of like what we were. And people would come in and they would be like, hey, I'll drive to Montreal to buy Bitcoin. They were like, hey, I'll drive from New York City. I'll drive from Chicago. I'll fly in from Vancouver to buy Bitcoin from you guys. And I was like, what, really? Why? It's like, well, because, you know, you've got your face on the website, and like, I saw your YouTube video. You guys are, and that's what we're talking about. Like, you know, we trust you guys because, you know, it doesn't matter if the website's shitty. Like, they see
you
our
have a physical location.
We have a physical location, so we'll fly over to you. I'm like, you can't do that. That's nuts. It's going to cost you $1,000 to say, hey, like, maybe it's going to cost me $1,000, but I want to buy like $8,000 worth of Bitcoin. And, you know, if I go to the Bitcoin ATM here, I'm going to be paying 10% anyway. So might as well go to you guys. You're charging 2 or 3%.
Do you think that, like, the new regulations and things that you're now going through, because now you're like running a regulated financial institution. Yeah. Do you like that, or is that future? Do you see yourself in that role in the future? Because now that you almost like, if you go out on Twitter and say like fuck Canada, you could potentially not lose your license, but piss someone off, and then now your business is at stake. Not that you would, of course, but do you see yourself in the future being in this role?
It doesn't change much for me, to be honest. I actually like from a lifestyle point of view, I like being regulated, just because I'm a little tired after all these years in Bitcoin, and I don't really feel like hustling anymore. And I like the idea of having something that's stable. But no, I mean, I can still say fuck you, Canada, all I want, and I can even say it louder now, because I don't have any fear of not having this license. And in Canada, it's actually not bad at all. It's really not like the US. Like, we don't even have licenses. Anybody can sell Bitcoin. When you're regulated, it just means that you need to keep records and report suspicious transactions, but you don't need a license to operate an exchange. You just need to comply with the practices that they set out. So I can still say fuck you, and I can say fuck you even louder now, because I feel more confident being regulated. But for sure, when you were unregulated, it was another time.
It was a different world, yeah.
It was a different world. It was very stressful also, and the cash business in Bitcoin is very different than. So Bull Bitcoin has never dealt with cash since I incorporated my company.
Yeah,
I said like. I decided to quit the cash stuff. After Backpage, after the Backpage explosion, we were working like nonstop. Like, we basically plugged our phone number to this SMS software, and we have like 5-6 people working like 12 hours a day answering text messages, helping basically hookers from all over the world install Grid wallets and install Mycelium and install Electrum. And in places that they weren't from Canada, we would direct them to go on Paxful. We would have this directory of Bitcoin ATMs, and we would help these girls like buy Bitcoin, because that's like the one thing also that really changed my mind about Bitcoin a lot was it's weird to have like people crying, saying like, this is really complicated. I just need to feed my kids. Sir. Like, I gotta work. And by work, they mean they need to prostitute themselves, but they can't get clients unless they get their ads on Backpage. And like, sir, like, I can't pay. Physically, I'm being censored out of my job. I need your help. And it was really emotional. And that's when you realize like, and that's a part of the like fee situation with Bitcoin, like the transaction fees. That's when I was like, fuck the transaction fees. Like, who gives a fuck about the transaction fees? Seriously. Because my point at the time was, hey, like that lady is paying $10 for $20 of Bitcoin at the local Bitcoins guy. She does not care about 60 cents transaction fee. She wants that payment to go from point A to point B, and she's censored, and nothing else is going to work. She can't.
So censorship resistance has a cost, essentially.
Yeah. It absolutely does.
I think I read that on your like on your Twitter, your blog, that quote or something. You know, censorship resistance has a cost. How can people follow your Twitter and everything like that? What's your Twitter and your blog?
Just at Francis Pouliot _. And everything's on my Twitter now. I don't blog anymore. I fell into the dopamine addiction of Twitter. So if it doesn't fit, like my brain starts to think in 240 character. When I write a tweet, I'm always exactly on the limit because my brain's just conditioned to think in these kind of small bursts of memes and viral ideas. But so the whole Backpage saga was really illuminating for me as to and it was illuminating to me, first of all, because we would never recommend a hosted wallet or custodial, never. It was always Bread Wallet, and it was always Mycelium at the time. And
oh yeah, I remember those two.
And people were fine with it. Like as long as you got this little help in the beginning about, write down the words and put your pen and stuff like that. People were fine with it. It was okay. And we're talking about like the kind of people that you would think they're never going to be able to use Bitcoin. The kind of demographics that are like, there's no way these people have problem with emails. Like they're not going to be good with Bitcoin. They were so good with Bitcoin. And then this overwhelming demand, which was like, I don't need to sell this thing. Like people are going to buy Bitcoin because they need to eat. Like that's the killer app. It's the killer app of Bitcoin is being able to feed yourself. Like people don't get that. Like
the killer app of Bitcoin is its existence.
Exactly. It's 100%.
Yeah.
There's two killer apps of Bitcoin. It's like inflation is going to eat your savings away, and you're not going to be able to.
It's not going money. To. It is. We're living through it now.
Yeah.
But
absolutely.
Francis, I just want to thank you for your time and everything, and because I got to run, and I'd love to have you back on the show again and talk to you soon. And can you just repeat your Twitter account one more time?
Yeah. So Twitter account is at Francis Pouliot with an underscore at the end, and I have
Perfect.
I'm not an impersonator. And feel free to just DM me if I follow you, or if you keep replying and liking my tweets enough, I'll eventually follow you. I like following random people on Twitter. So